pioneered the new women's history in method and vision and lesbian history since the vibrant 1970s in the US. Her paradigm-shifting early work cemented collaborative visions and analyses of then later known as second-wave US feminists, inspiring early and later theorizations of lesbian feminism and lesbian history. Professor Carroll Smith-Rosenberg will be delivering a series of 3 lectures in Taiwan, with today the first one, and she has very kindly shifted the topic a little bit in view of our center to the Mulatta, which was going to be the third one. So now it's the Mulatta, Desire, Danger, and Gender, Transgression in the Age of Revolution, rather than Race, Rights, and Revolution, White Slaves, Black Revolutionaries. I'm hoping that you might have, because the 3 are interrelated, as I understand it, so that you might have the opportunity to attend the others if time permits. At Xiaogang, right? Yes. Okay, so let's welcome.
Thank you so much. It is a thrill to be here, and I want to thank all the people who made this possible. Certainly Joyce Lewitt and Ray has been a godsend to me because I'm not the most competent person in the world, and Elaine and Rada and Brian have been wonderful in welcoming me here and making this whole trip a possibility. So I am thrilled, and I'm very, very interested in your gender studies programs here and the political bent that so many of them take, which is very, very exciting in this time when political agency has come back to the fore of our lives. A very good move indeed. So I want to thank you. I want to also say that I was asked to give a 2-hour lecture. Now, no one can sit and concentrate for 2 hours. So what we'll take, it really breaks into 2 separate pieces, and which is an obvious time for a fairly lengthy break. But I also want to urge you, when if you have questions, disagreements, those are always the best, that you interrupt me, raise your hand, and I think there will be a number of times when a discussion might be very appropriate. So, and again, if I have a nice New York accent, which I don't hear because I think it's normal, but if you have difficulty understanding me, please also speak up. Okay. So I have, this lecture is really entitled The Mulatto, the Liberal Paradox Embodied. Now, the age of enlightenment, the age of reason, of the promise of universal freedom and unalienable rights, the age of chattel slavery, of the middle passage, of people as property, were disturbing oxymorons, were grotesquely wedded oppositions. Yet they coexisted during one of the most radical periods in human history, the age of revolution, a time of chaos, transformation, and struggle, very similar to our own, but also a moment of excitement, of hope, when the political world seemed about to be remade and the promise of freedom unlimited. For nearly 150 years, and I should have first said, I'm a historian, so you're going to get a lot of history. I apologize to some extent, but I think some of it is quite relevant to our own lives today. Historians are always saying that, of course. I think it may be true. For nearly 150 years, from Britain's glorious revolution in 1689 to the 1820s and the rise of republics throughout Latin America, increasingly radical political uprisings crisscrossed the Atlantic, From London and the Glorious Revolution to Philadelphia and the American Revolution, back to Paris and the French Revolution, to Ireland, the Netherlands, Hungary, back again to Guadeloupe and Haiti and Latin America. Tumbling one after another in intense interaction with one another. These revolutions proclaimed that all men were free, equal, and endowed with unalienable rights. That governments rested on the consent of the people. They challenged the concept of absolute monarchies and the empires they spawned, gave birth to post-colonial republics throughout the Americas. For the first time in history, questioned the legitimacy of human slavery, and bringing all these revolutionary challenges together, spearheaded the torturous processes by which modern republics and democratic citizenship took form. How then were these bright promises belayed? How did political and ideological backlash sweep across the Atlantic? Chattel slavery resume its dominion in the Caribbean, Brazil, and the U.S. South. Racialized imperialism become the order of the day from the 17th or from the 18th century to the 20th. I am far from the only scholar to engage in this quandary. Legal feminists and race theorists, subaltern studies scholars and post-colonial theorists, political philosophers, historians, literary critics, all have pondered these questions. Many have seen the West's long history of racialized and engendered exclusion as an anachronistic remnant of a pre-enlightened past, but other scholars demur. Carroll insists that a pre-existing sexual contract undercut the radical promises of both Locke and Rousseau's social contract. Feminist critics Drusilla Cornell, Cheryl Harris, and Joan Scott argue that liberalism's insistence on sameness excludes all who are perceived as different or who make claims upon liberal legal and constitutional systems in excess to those traditionally granted to white men. Echoing Samuel Johnson's quip that we hear the loudest yelps for liberty among the drivers of Negroes, political philosopher Judith Sklar points out that, and I quote, the most radical claims for freedom and political equality were played out in counterpoint to chattel slavery. Underscoring Sklar's argument, Derek Bell and Preet Bansal insist that there was no contradiction between Republican ideals and racial oppression. They are mutually constitutive rather than antithetical. A growing number of younger scholars have historicized these observations, examining the ways equality and unalienable rights become white men's exclusive property. Now, so far my references are to U.S. scholars, but the contradictions, the paradoxes embedded in liberalism are far from unique to the United States. Charles Mills directly challenges liberalism's claims to unqualified universalism. Holding up the writings of Locke and Kant as evidence, he insists that, quote, racism is not an anomaly in an unqualified liberal universalism, but symbolically related to a qualified and particularistic liberalism, racial liberalism. Both Genevieve Fred and Etienne Bolivar have explored Enlightenment fears of difference, exclusionary practices, and closed political borders. But it is Uday Mata who makes the point most succinctly. In his theoretical vision, he writes, liberalism from the 17th century to the present has prided itself on its universality and politically inclusionary character. And yet, when viewed as a historical phenomenon, the period of liberal history is unmistakably marked by the systematic and sustained political exclusion of various groups and types of people. The inclusionary pretensions of liberal theory and the exclusionary effects of liberal practices need to be explained. We must probe deeper, Meta insists, plumb Enlightenment liberalism's fusion of promises and restraints, trace the ways radical potential has been effectively contained. Meta's questions point us to a deep-seated tension between Enlightenment liberalism's celebration of universal equality and unalienable rights and its inability to associate rights with difference or social order with diversity. Sameness and difference, rights and diversity constitute critical fault lines within liberal thought. Now, to further our explorations today, I propose to analyze the sexual and racialized images ubiquitous in 18th and 19th century liberal texts. Were they, as Foucault argues, used to reestablish social order in a time of chaos and transformation, to reaffirm the natural, the biologically determined order of things, or as points of resistance and reimagining, did they offer alternatives to that order, empowering the excluded, if only in their own imagination? But the imagination is not real, you might say. Or I would ask, is it? It is in the imagination that, and within the imagination, that disorderly desires can emerge, disruptive senses of self, the impulse for change. Etienne Arbor insists that exclusion is the enemy of democracy, and that exclusion is tied to an intense identity with a single nation, ethnicity, religion, or race. I would also add gender. To break through such isolation, to democratize the association of rights with citizenship, religion, or race, Bolivar continues, it is important to break open confining identities, create spaces of free play in which individuals or groups can experiment with and experience multiple identities. Identities might then become dynamic, inclusive, as individuals identified and disidentified across multiple national, racial, gendered, and sexual binaries. Membership in a nation or a religion would then be transformed into joining. Identities would become more flexible, changing, multiple, inclusive. No longer determined by the accident of birth, citizenship could be imagined in far more open and inclusive ways. A major step towards democracy could be taken. But as Bolivar is just one more romantic fantasy. If we think how quickly fascistic identities with a nation or a race have reemerged in recent years, then we must admit that the imaginary identities can be effective forces for change, negative as well as positive. In an attempt to explore at least some of these issues, let us turn our attention to a tantalizing and enigmatic figure who, literally embodying sameness and difference, danced lightly across liberalism's ideological forelines, permitting us new insights into the formation and operation of those forelines. Let it look at exclusionary identities from the perspective of the mulatto, or the mixed-race woman. The sexualized emblem of hybridity, the mulatto undercut the Atlantic world systems of stability and order in striking ways. Designed to confirm rigid categories of racialized class and gender differences, she repeatedly challenged them. And she did so in ways her male equivalent, the mulatto, did not. I should stop right here and ask if you are familiar with this term, the mulatto. It refers to a person, a multiracial person. And it was a big term in the 18th century, and especially in the Caribbean, where mulattoes had sometimes special privileges. They would be, for instance, the child of a white planter and of one of his black slaves or mulatto slaves. So you would have a mixed racial person. And in the United States, the term mulatto really, well, you could say Barack Obama is a mulatto. I think the clearest and most recent example of somebody. And I do think his election, his mulatto status, made his election more probable and possible, because the campaign, and Americans kept focusing on, well, he had this white grandfather who served in the Second World War and took care of him and so forth and so on. We're from Kansas, like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. It made him seem less different. But for most of the 19th and 18th century in the United States, the mulatto was not a recognized category because we had the one drop of blackness determining one's race in the United States, but not so in the Francophone Caribbean, or even in the Anglophone, or the Hispanic Caribbean, or in Brazil, or Suriname. Mulattoes were a recognized class, and at that point, in certain cases, especially if their fathers, either mulatto or white fathers, had money, wealth, and status, then they could be an empowered group, be sent to France for education, etc. So it's a broad category, primarily not in the United States. I mean, no one ever called Barack Obama a mulatto, to my knowledge. But that's precisely what it was. He was, he is, and it's a significant component of his identity, politically focused identity. But he was born in the United States. I want to look then at the mulatto, the mulatta, the female, as after this brief explanation. Now, the sexualized emblem of hybridity, the mulatta undercut the Atlantic world's systems of stability and order in striking ways. She was designed to confirm rigid categories of racialized class and gender differences, especially in the United States, with its one drop of blackness legally established until the